Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 30 Plus Click with Max and you. And now we're going to move on to the final segment of trending news from around the world before we get to our guest in the studio. And the final segment is brought to you courtesy of IRCC. And at this point, I'm going to let Yo-Yo take it away because she knows this more than me.
In terms of IRCC, that is the immigration regulation for Canada. If you're trying to immigrate into Canada, that you have different options. You can come in as a visitor just to look at the country to see if this is a country you really want to spend your good number of years in. Then you can do a survey and go back because you have a visitor's visa. Okay, and the second point, you can decide to come in as a student because sometimes the first degree most of us heard was not because it's a place of choice. It's not because that is really what we wanted to do, but that was what was available at that time. And we decided to study biochemistry instead of medicine. We decided to study mass communication instead of law. And so we decided to study so many variations. And so after gaining work experience for about 10 years, 15 years, 7 years, 2 years, and you realize that this is not what I want. I think I need to study, and so I can fit into my purpose, my career that I really want to do. And so if you want to decide to come school or study in Canada, it is an excellent destination for you to choose. However, policies never are static. They are always evolving depending on the economic situation of the country, there's so many factors that determine policies. And so for right now, for the international student route, it is an uncertain route. However, is it still good? Absolutely. Is it a good destination? Yes. Please come and take a course. Come and take a program. You can decide to come to New Brunswick and UMB. You can decide to go to Ontario, Conestoga College. You can decide to go any province and just take your wonderful program because what you would learn in classroom, you would have the opportunity to practice it. And beyond that, you have the opportunity to meet so many people that have come from different countries. And so your wealth of knowledge in that career field, your wealth of knowledge in that industry would be larger and more than the classroom. And so there's so many ways to immigrate. Like I mentioned earlier, there's another pathway called the permanent residency. So every month, there is always an update. You would hear different updates from different websites. However, if you want to verify the authenticity of the news, please go to IRCC portal and give in some time to read to get the actual update and recent news. Because what might be announced in September, come November, there is also another update coming. So stay tuned, and we will try to bring it up once as we can, but always go back to the government website for recent and authentic news.
And for those of you who might not have been aware, so just some of the recent news that's coming out of IRCC for this week, from this week, is they're going to be starting to put a tighter strain on immigration for student visas starting from 2025, just so that you're aware. I think the figures that is, there's going to be a 50,000 drop in the number of study permits issued in 2025 as compared to what is going to be issued in 2024, and I think there's going to be need for a provincial attestation letter for people who are now studying masters and PhD. There's also going to be a new language requirement for university and college students. This is when you consider the postgraduate work permit, you're now going to require a new language requirement. And I'm not really sure, but I think for college students, you need to get at least a 5 on the test. And for university students, you need to at least get a 6. Don't quote me on that. So do your research and find out for yourself. And of course, for spousal open work permit, there's now been new restrictions around that. So if this is something that you're looking to come into Canada within 2025, I encourage you to look into it, to do your research. A lot of new policies have come out this week that is definitely shaking up the landscape for what immigration and things are going to look like for international students moving forward. And that brings me to the end of this trending news from around the world. And it's the fact that we ended on in immigration is quite interesting because that brings us to an interesting pivot. It's quite intentional. With us in the studio to discuss, I'm blushing because I haven't seen her in quite a while, but with us in the studio is our professor from our days in college. I'm going to let Yo-Yo introduce her because she's just simply fantastic and I wouldn't do her justice enough. So Yo-Yo, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for who you've been to us, Max and Yo-Yo. Thank you so much for supporting us. I remember writing at 30plusclique and I had a conversation with you. You gave me wings to do this. And so I will never forget how you've supported me in everything I tried to do. There was no time you said, oh, no, I don't think it's a good idea. You always allowed me to explore. And so thank you. And I'm so proud, right, to invite you to our studio today. And so thank you so much, Professor Kristen, and thank you for joining us today.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Yo-Yo and Max.
Thank you so much, Professor. Professor Kristen was my professor. I think one of my first, in my introduction to Canada, actually, in Canada College. She took us of English, my professor of English. So I'm going to call you professor on this chat because I'm Nigerian and that is what I'm going to do. Like, I cannot call you Kristen. It's not what your status. So thank you so much for joining us today. There's something that comes to mind as people immigrate. It's a journey that people often struggle with. And I remember when I was planning out the show, Yo-Yo talked to me about something that you always say to her, like, softly, take it easy. It takes a step. It's not going to happen for you overnight. And I think, like many people who are immigrating, they have this initiative that is just going to be overnight. It's going to be easy. Of course, the road is tough. You have to give it some time. And I know you immigrated yourself. But can you introduce, we've introduced you. So this is the conversation that we want to have with you today in terms of like taking it easy and writing it out and staying in the trenches or putting in the work. But like, if you want to introduce yourself to the people, let them know a little bit of who Kristen is or Professor is, and then we can take the conversation from there.
A little bit about myself. I actually grew up as a missionary kid. So grew up moving around the world. My parents were missionaries with the Wesleyan Church. And so had a lot of experience with transitioning and sort of between cultures all growing up till I was 14. When I was 14, my parents moved back to the States and settled in Indiana. And I went to high school in Indiana and university in Indiana, where I met my husband, Dwayne, who also is a missionary kid. So he also grew up moving all over the world. So I've always had a soft spot for immigrants and international students, and just that transition that has to happen. We then went on to both work in higher ed. Dwayne, my husband, works in student affairs. I work in the more academic side of things. I run a writing center right now. I manage a writing center at Wilfrid Laurier University. But while we were married, we moved, oh goodness, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different times before we settled here. So moving and transitioning between cultures and different places has been very, very familiar for me. And I did have to immigrate to Canada. So I married a Canadian, which is a very good way to move to Canada if you're going to do it. But it was still a process. I still had to immigrate, had to go through the permanent residence process. Wasn't able to work initially because of that. And then my degree didn't necessarily translate. So I had to get another degree, like so many international students do in Canada. And I think it took me about 7 years before I ended up here where I'm at now, managing the writing center. So it took a while for me to get my feet on the ground again. But in the meantime, I was taking care of our kids. We have 2 kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter named Noelle and a 13-year-old son named Nathan. And I also am a writer, so I was writing as well during that time, studying, taking care of our family. So God has been really good through that transition. But the things that I have learned about transitioning and moving across cultures, and these are numbers that we talk a lot about in the missionary community of people who are who are transitioning into different cultures, it takes about 8 to 12 months for you to make any significant connections in terms of relationships, friendships. So when you move somewhere new, brand new, you're starting over completely. When I moved to Canada, I didn't have any friends here. I didn't have any family here. And it usually takes about 8 to 12 months before you make any significant connections with someone that's going to really, maybe a group of people that really feel like good friends. And then we say it takes about 2 years for you to feel at home. And I would say it takes about 3 years before you're really thriving. And I think that 2 years before you feel at home, especially with the intercultural thing, right? You have to get used to new cultural norms, new languages, jokes, comedy in different cultures is different, food is different. And so I think that has been the most helpful for me in my transitions, to just understand it's normal. It's normal for there to be ups and downs in the transitions. It's normal to feel uncomfortable. It's normal for that transition to take time, and God is faithful through that that time and that transition. So yeah, I'd shared a little bit of that with Yo-Yo too. And I think it can be frustrating because, you come to these places and you're a highly qualified, capable, competent person, and you want to hit the ground running. I was a professor in the States and I had been working at writing centers in the States, but my degree, higher ed in Canada, is different than higher ed in the United States, and it didn't quite translate. And so I had to kind of restart my whole career completely over again. And as I said, it took about 7 years before I was back on my feet again. So I don't know if that normalizes the transition a little bit for people, but that's been my insight and my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insight with us. We really, really appreciate that sharing, because sometimes we feel that in terms of settling and in terms of transitioning, there is a particular country or continent that needs to suffer a little bit, but that needs to wait a little bit. But you sharing your own insight is also very important to listeners, and also important to us also doing this as 30plusclique, because everything sometimes is just a process, it's just a journey, and sometimes it's just a phase as well. You need to just give yourself some grace. You need to just take a deep breath right now. If you're in UK, you've left Nigeria to UK, you've come over from India to Canada, you've left Ghana to America, you've left South Africa to Australia, and you're just anywhere in the world right now, just tell yourself it is okay and you are doing well. Give yourself some grace. This is a process. This is a journey. And when we talk about it together with Max, and you're like, okay, so imagine you in your own country, someone just immigrate from another country and unseats you from your job. And how would you feel? And so that is the same thing. So you need to put forth your best skills. You need to put forth your best food. You just need to also be patient with this process. It is a process. You will be fine. And once you make that decision that you're doing this, forget what it is in Egypt. Right? Not Egypt in the country, but if you're a Bible scholar, you know what I mean. So forget the watermelon, forget the cucumber, and just focus, right? And what can you do to integrate into the system? One tips we're going to be sharing now is networking. Never underestimate the power of networking. Don't just go and keep to yourself, oh, I need to move along with people from this country. Oh, I need to move along with people from this nation. Oh, I need to move along with people from this industry. Network beyond borders. Also, number 2, try to volunteer. Try out your skills. You are very skillful in a sensing way, right? Look for opportunities for you to volunteer. So beyond that volunteering, you're also going to meet people, you're also going to network, and these are valuable tips that can help you integrate quickly into any country you find yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for us, finding a church community was really important to connect to while we were here, a place to worship, and then our jobs, and then in our communities as well. I think that's just really wonderful advice, Yo-Yo, to get connected, and then also give yourself space and time to be with people who feel familiar and comfortable. I think as someone who's immigrating, you're often the minority in the room. You're the only person who looks like you, sounds like you, talks like you, and that can be exhausting if it's all the time. It is. It's tiring, and so I think it's okay to every now and then just give yourself a little bit of time if you need to call your friends and family back at home, or if you find other people from similar countries in your new country, from your home country, to connect with, and it lets you just kind of relax a little bit. You don't have to always be thinking about, well, how am I coming across, and am I hitting all the cultural cues, and am I understanding everything? So I think it's okay to give yourself permission to look out every now and then, just for those little pockets of familiarity, because it is hard to be in a new country and in a new culture and constantly having to negotiate all of that change and that difference. You'll grow, you'll become vibrant, you'll expand yourself and your capacities more than you ever thought you knew. But it's okay to take care of yourself too. Cook your favorite food from home every now and then. Listen to your favorite music every now and then from home. It's a balance, but and I think that's what Yo-Yo you're saying, having grace with yourself. I think is really important.
I think earlier this week I was on Twitter, and I read about the story about a young couple that had immigrated from Nigeria to, I want to say the Atlantics, but I cannot be sure of exactly where in the Atlantics, but in Canada. Of course, in the process of transitioning from Nigeria to Canada, they had, of course, sold everything that they had back in Nigeria, essentially started afresh. And then they came here, and all of the things that you're saying happened. It's not been easy. It's not been the way they expected. The jobs are not as much as they used to be because, of course, there was a global inflation. The economy was not where it was. It's not where it was 5 years ago. And of course, there's that homesickness, and you don't know anybody. You're in a new place. You've landed with a young family and kids. And I know that probably this is a situation that relates to somebody who came from Nigeria, but you came from the States as well. So it's a little bit different, but at the same time similar. My question to you was, how were you able to manage your mental health during this very period of uncertainty? Because if we're being honest, that is what it is. You're very uncertain. You don't know where things are going to be from. For this young couple, they're thinking about, do we want to go back? How were you able to stay with it in a way, even when it didn't look like it?
It was hard. The first 2 years here were very difficult for me. And I speak English I don't necessarily have an accent, that people have to, I kind of sound like everyone here. But it was, so I didn't have to overcome some of those challenges that I think immigrants from non-English speaking countries have to overcome when they come to Canada. But even with that, it was hard. Moving is hard. And, it was absolutely the right choice for us to make. God bless that choice for us and our family. And our life has flourished here. But those first 2 years were very, very hard, Max. And my mental health did struggle. The ways that I got through it were I wrote. I have always been a writer. That's a way that I take care of myself. It's a way that I pray. It's a way that I commune with God, but also make sense of the world. So I actually wrote a book during that time, just sort of documenting that season of transition. I also went to a counselor, a therapist, to talk to them and try to process some of the grief I was feeling, because change brings with it chaos and grief. And so it's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that. And I think there's a gift in grief too that God has for us to help us get to the other side of healing. And then our church was a big part of that, having a church family and community to rely on. And then I also I had for years already been taking some anti-anxiety medication, and my doctor did help to boost that dose a little bit for those. I think the 6-month mark was really the toughest mark, because at about 6 months, all the excitement and shine of the move has worn off. And at 6 months, you're really starting to get into the trenches of like, oh, here's where I am. Here's where I've landed. Here are the realities of what the job market is or what things are. And so that helped for a little bit too. So it is important. And I think what I want your listeners to really take away is there's nothing wrong with you if you're struggling. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're not doing the right thing for your life. Doesn't mean it wasn't the right choice. It is a natural part of transition, to grieve, for it to be difficult and uncomfortable at first. And there's no panacea for it but time. You just have to live through it and take care of yourself and pay attention, give yourself the space, tend to your mental health, like you were saying, Max. Use those resources, networks, and things to buoy yourself up. Don't get into this single mindset of like, I've just got to like be stronger and get over it. Don't isolate yourself through it.
Well, Professor, I couldn't have said it better myself. And as you were speaking, I remember my first few months in Canada. You know, like you said earlier, you leave your country as a professional, a very competent professional. And I found myself working retail for the first time in my life. It was hard. It was so hard. And then we're having to do that dredging snow, you know, walking through dredging. It's so cold. You know, I remember those mornings when I'd have an early morning shift and it's so cold and it was so hard. Prior to now, I used to have a different YouTube channel. And I always thought when I came, I was going to continue with my friend and we were going to keep doing it. But then I landed and I said, no, YouTube is not it's not the primary priority for this time. I had to go through that season of it being hard. And then to get to this place where I can now get back on camera to do this 30plusclique with Max and Yo-Yo is quite something. So if you had told me then, when I was going through that very first 2 years of it, that I would ever come back and be doing this, I probably would have said no. Like I had more difficult things going on, more real things going on in my life at the time. But we made it through. We stuck with it. We assimilated, and here we are just a few short years later, and now we're doing a show where other people can learn from what we've done. It's not easy, but it's worth it. I don't know if you have anything to say, Yo-Yo.
Well, like you said, it is really worth it. So if you're stuck right now, you just arrived maybe 6 months ago, you're still taking all the beautiful pictures. Good job. And if you're done taking all the pictures and you're asking yourself, where am I? What is going on? And if you're done with school, you just graduated and you're looking for a job, you've done like 200 resumes and nothing is coming forth, please relax, right? Give yourself grace. I met a student 2 weeks ago, and the student just wanted to jump from the managerial job in Nigeria and just wanted to jump into another managerial job in Canada. I was like, wow, I love that ambition. It is good, but keep it in one part of your heart. And just at least when you're done with school, you can bring it up, because you might not most likely get a managerial job for part-time hours, because as a student, you're only allowed to work for 20 hours. And so, would you be managing for 20 hours? So I'm not saying it's not possible. It's possible, but just be real. So wherever you are right now in any of your immigration journey or pathway, just be real. The one thing you want to do to yourself is to deceive yourself. And when you're going to LinkedIn, you're going to Indeed to apply for a job, are you really deceiving yourself with the job title that you're applying for? What can you start with? You just need to start and grow. I remember coming to Canada. I had to take off 7 years of my resume because I needed to just work. And after applying for so many jobs with my job title back in Nigeria, I wasn't getting anything. I was like, you know what? Yes, rank it up. I took it off and I got my first job in Canada. Devise a means, but just start. And one good thing in Canada is whatever you've done, they value the experience. And those skills are very transferable. They just want to know that you've started. So start with something, earn some money, put food on your table, and so that you can think clearly and know where you could transfer those Canadian skills and top it up with your national experience or competencies that you're bringing from your own country. Put these two combination, and you see you're going to get to your desired dream. And so that is tips number 3 or number 4. And so we're just sharing our stories. We are all immigrants here, technically. But so we're just giving tips and sharing our beautiful stories and where we are, and we're still going places. We've not arrived yet.
I worked retail for the first 2 years for free because I couldn't get paid because I was having to go through the permanent resident. So when you come in as a student, you can work, but when you come in as a spouse married to a Canadian, you have to go through the permanent residence. You can't get paid to work. And so, I went from being a professor in the States and working in a writing center. And my boss, right before we left to come to Canada, offered me the job to be the director of the writing center there in the States. And I had to say no because we were moving to Canada. And the reason why we came to Canada is because we believed that we would be able to provide a better life for our children and our whole family here. And I think that's the other thing you have to keep in mind is you're coming here for the future. You're coming here for your children. And so you will have to make those sacrifices at first. You won't be able to just jump. I mean, by, a miracle maybe, but to jump from a manager to a manager position. But you have to keep your eye on the prize for the goal. We knew this place would be better for our children. We knew it would be better for us as a family. And so I worked retail for free for 2 years until I got my permanent residence. And then I worked part-time teaching classes I'd never taught before. And then I went back to school. And then finally, 7 years in, I was, a manager again, back to where I had been in 2015 when we moved here. So I think, all of that is really right. It's just a part of the process. And I think you just have to kind of humble yourself and realize there's always, I love Yo-Yo's attitude. There's always room to grow. There's always room to learn. There's always things I can learn again in different spaces and different jobs. So it does pay off. It does all come full circle again. You just have to put in the time and give yourself the time to make that transition.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor, for saying that, because again, I know that we're speaking about this in the context of people who are in Canada, but I promise that this is not just an isolated incident, whether you be in Canada, in the UK, the US, Germany, or Europe, wherever you ended up migrating to. I'm sure that it is most likely the same for you. Take the time you need. Start, going from having a high level professional work, like Professor Kirsten just said, being a manager to working unpaid. It might look like a trend backward, but when you remember why you started, all of this, I'm almost getting to thinking about a scripture in my mind, but I don't want to quote it because this has been so scripture heavy today. But I'm like, it's always, you just press on. You look not on things that are behind, just press on. And when you remember your why, stay strong in your why. It's not easy, especially if you're like us who came from a Sahara desert. It's hot, and then suddenly it's cold. It's always cold. You're having to adapt. It's even when I came here that I understood that there was something called seasonal depression. Thankfully I haven't had it yet, but I can see the impact of seasonal depression on people. You have to learn how to navigate people when they're undergoing their very seasonal depression. It takes time, even learning your environment. So to all the people who are out there thinking about immigrating, if you can, do it, but understand what is your why. But before going to any countries anyway, I would always ask you to research, because I find that one of the things that a lot of people are doing wrong is following the herd mentality. Canada is the popping place to immigrate to, or by 2025 it won't be actually, but Canada is the popping place to go to, and so a lot of people are just following the herd mentality and going to Canada, and without doing their proper research. What is the country like? What is the economy like? What are the people like? What is the environment like? And so when you come here, you get shocked. So if you know what you want, if you understand your why, this is I think the fourth or the fifth tip, I don't know where we are, Yo-Yo. If you understand your why, you understand what you want to do, you research about the countries of the world, there's so many of them, and then you figure out the one that works for your why, and you go there, you stay with it, you persist, and you hang in there, give it some time, give yourself grace. This is something that I learned in Canada. The term give yourself grace is the Canadian term that I've learned, It's like, give yourself grace and it's all going to be worth it. And I'm going to let you have the last word.
Well, my last word is going to be pray. Have a solid relationship with God and always talk to Him. It is one way to just let it go. I remember during one of those winter days, I looked up, I looked down, I looked left, I looked right. There was nothing to do other than to cry while walking under the snow. I did that at the end of the day. After crying, I started praying. After praying, I think I felt better. So don't remove that part of communication with God. And so, I don't know. So that communication, you cannot explain what it does, but I think I want to give this to Professor Kristen. And what we did not tell you is that Professor Kristen is a pastor. And so I think she'll be able to explain this portion for us.
About praying?
Yeah, and communicating with God.
Oh, I mean, it's the life source. It's your life source. It's what helps you get through this whole transition, is knowing that He has good plans. We know that He has good plans for us, and that as long as we are faithful and submitting our hearts and our lives to Him, that He will work everything together for our good, for His glory. And I think just staying in touch with Him and staying connected to Him, that's the only way I was able to get through all of this. I remember one of the images that came to me in those early 2 years when I was really struggling, and I just felt like I was sitting in the shadow all the time. And I just remember saying to God, like, why are you allowing this? Why are you allowing me to feel so sort of abandoned and sort of alone and grieving in this time? I just feel like I'm sitting in your shadow rather than looking at the sun, like the light of your face. I feel like I'm in your shadow, God. And I just remember so clearly the Holy Spirit said to me, but there wouldn't be a shadow if I wasn't here. And that sense of like, I was sitting right next to God and I was sitting under His shadow, that He was covering me even in that way, and even in that space was a beautiful encouragement to me. So I think that is our life source. That's what keeps us focused every day. And when you can't do anything else, like Yo-Yo said, when you look up and you look down, look around, all you see is snow and gray skies, you need to pray. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Kristen, for joining us today. And we're going to be wrapping this session. We've said a lot in this episode because we decided to keep saying a lot, and so that we have different sides to our 30plusclique episode every time we upload. So thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all the likes. Thank you for all the sharing. We love you. We cannot be here without your support. And so I want to encourage you, if you've been inspired, motivated in any way, leave us a comment. We love to communicate with you. We love to read your notes. We pick everything and we appreciate you. So please subscribe to our channel, share with us your other friends, and we love you. Have a wonderful week.
Bye.